It had been raining over us for 4 days straight, a familiar thing. Mark Actaeon sat in his office, dark, smoky, with stale air, with battered bookcases, rare artifacts in glass niches. There was an obsidian mask from the planet Rex Saul which cannot be worn for more than a minute, otherwise you start to see the death of all your relatives. Not very pleasant. On a separate pedestal stood a statue of the Vulmar spider god, rotating without a power source. Mark never understood what language it whispered something in at night, but every time this monster began its monotonous song, Mark's head split terribly. He had wanted to throw it away dozens of times, but remembering how much it cost on the black market, he immediately discarded such a wasteful idea. In the center of the table, Mark placed a petal from the ash gardens of Martus, sealed in tungsten glass. An interesting thing. According to legend, this petal is capable of causing tears in anyone who touches it. Mark has not yet tested this on himself, but the soldier of the Empire from whom he took it burst into tears like a 5-year-old girl whose favorite doll was taken away. Mark had special memories with the mechanical beetle from the planet Verandera. He had received it from his first love, Arendet. The beetle had a pair of keys built into its chest shell. If you played the right chord, it would play the melody of a vanished people. Mark loved to reminisce, and often turned on the thing. But his absolute favorite of all the collected artifacts is a shard of a mirror from the Temple of the Aeonians, distorted so that in it each person saw himself only with the one he truly loved. Mark liked to look into this mirror from time to time, but not too often, otherwise he could go crazy. After all, sometimes the mirror showed memories that Mark did not really want to relive. The window shook in the wind. Rain drummed rhythmically on the windowsill, as if someone was plucking strings with their fingers. Behind Mark, a hologram of a star map glowed, constantly changing. He was studying Verilan, a planet that had disappeared from official maps almost a century ago. Suddenly, without knocking, the door opened. A woman entered, tall with the bearing of a true aristocrat. Her face was hidden by a veil, a long black coat wet from the rain. She approached without a word, put a metal case on the table, and opened it. Inside were bars of gold. Real gold. Mark whistled. Mark Actaeon, she said. Her voice was low and hoarse. I'm looking for an artifact that can bring back the dead. The woman stopped short. She sat down on a chair and looked around. It was obvious that she was nervous. More precisely, not quite so. An artifact that has power over time. Usually I'm asked to find a mask, a dagger, a trophy from an extinct planet, but this, I don't even know. Mark cleared his throat and paused. Who is this? Who do you want to save? It's none of your business, the woman snapped. I have to know, Mark insisted. Otherwise, I won't take on this case. The woman sighed. My daughter. She died 7 years ago. I need the Chronos Stone. I visited dozens of libraries all over the universe. The archive on Olympus, the central library of the Sardon Empire. I even went to Aglaran just to find some information about this damn stone. Even so, Mark clicked his tongue in a business-like manner. Well, continue. I have to get this stone, the woman said in a whisper. I have to fix everything. I believe I can. There is no other way. But you understand that I'm not a detective? That's not required, the woman said coldly. But I've heard about your other talents. Find a stone. Just a stone and nothing more. I'll figure it out myself from here. I don't search for people. Once again, I need the stone. Madame was losing patience. The rest does not concern you, I told you. Mark was silent. His hand slid slowly to the edge of the table. The woman did not have time to pull away. When he touched her fingers, the world dissolved. Flames, a scream, a girl on the pavement. Time stood still, and her mother, with the silent horror in her eyes that had lived in her all these years. He took his hand away. Breathing heavily, Marcus Actaeon almost fell out of his chair. What are you? The woman gasped. How are you? It doesn't matter. Mark drank a glass of water in one gulp. They were silent for a while. But you do understand that this artifact is an extremely dangerous thing. Mark broke the silence at the moment when thunder rumbled outside the window. You understand all the consequences. 1,000,000 gold, the woman interrupted. Half now, half later. She closed the case. The stone is on Atlanta. There are coordinates here. Mark looked out the window for a long time. The rain only got stronger. The woman extended her hand. Are you taking it or not? He hated interfering in other people's lives, but 1 million gold? Damn it, that would cover half his debts. I will do everything in my power. Marcus Actaeon smiled and shook the outstretched hand. Chapter 2. The ship Orpheus was in hyperspace. "You're chasing the shadow again, Mark," said Armax. His monotonous voice came from the speakers. "You know yourself that Atlant is a hopeless hole. No million gold is worth it, and you're unlikely to get the other half. You understand that yourself." Marcus Actaeon paid no attention to these words. He sat in a chair, holding an old compass in his hands. It didn't work, ruined by a magnetic storm decades ago, but he liked to spin it. "Your lectures have long ceased to interest me, Armax," Mark sighed wearily. "Don't even try. And about Atlas? You're wrong. I expect to find answers." "Answers," Armax chuckled. "You've been looking for them ever since you touched the first human and learned how memories can hurt." Mark didn't answer. He just stood up and walked over to the window. "You love to talk so much, old man, as if you were once alive yourself." Armax paused. Then he answered. "I've been reading people longer than you've been around," he said. "I've had more people on board than in the football stadium on Galameda. But you, Mark, you're the only one listening." Mark glanced at the interface. "And you argue with me more often than anyone else." "Because I don't want to lose you," Armax said bluntly. "Atlantis isn't just a planet. It's an abyss that swallows up all living things. If the stone exists, then—" "That's none of your business," Mark interrupted him rudely. "I'll sort it all out myself, as always." Armax didn't answer. They were silent for a while. "We'll be arriving in 13 minutes, he finally said. "I'll drop you off near New Sand, and I'll try to keep the ship in stealth mode for at least a day. And then we'll have to change location." "Thank you," Mark muttered. He picked up the compass again. And at that moment, it swung. For the first time in many years. "Did you see this?" "Yes," answered Armax. "Something ahead is pulsating." Mark Actaeon clenched his palm. "Then we are on the right track." The Orpheus swerved, falling into Atlant's orbit, and the hoarse voice of the dispatcher was heard in the headphones. "New send in 15 minutes. Get your papers ready, stranger." Marcus Actaeon chuckled. Atlas was known as a haven for fugitives, smugglers, and other riffraff from all corners of the universe. The perfect place to hide something so powerful that even time itself could not resist it. Over the past 24 hours, he had sifted through dozens of online libraries and archives. There wasn't much useful information about the Chronos Stone, but there were plenty of tales and myths. But a couple of years ago, he had already heard about this thing. Words from an ancient letter found in a museum on Therius popped into my head. The stone has power over time. It is its breath. It seeks someone who is not afraid to see everything and change nothing. The city of New Sand was like a shell. On the outside, a layered shell of metal walls and barbed wire. On the inside, complete chaos. The streets resembled arteries through which life flowed. Noisy, dirty, the stench was so bad that Mark could hardly contain his urge to vomit. A crazy mixture of fragrant spices and herbs. Mark walked confidently, without stopping. He tried not to attract attention, in vain. His clean jacket, almost shining in the sun, aroused suspicion. This is not the custom here. First he headed to the local market. The shopping arcades were bursting with food and all sorts of goods. Hanging carcasses of various animals, tempting aromas of freshly baked goods, baskets with fish and stale meat smelling foul under the scorching sun, bunches of fruits and vegetables hanging side by side. A motley crowd of shoppers was scurrying around everywhere. Marcus Actaeon took a sip of his morning coffee, threw the cup into the trash, and continued to walk along the rows. Persistent sellers from all sides offered to taste the most delicate treacle pies, to buy 2-meter Chamberlain crayfish, and one thin old man with rotten teeth praised the amazing taste of mussels from the planet Oberon, blown up 100 years ago. A merchant with 3 teeth and his right eye replaced by a holographic visor showed him a stand with amulets. "Old trash," he said, "but if you've fallen from the moon, that's just the thing." Mark touched one of the amulets, amber glittering in the sun, and nothing. His power still only worked on living people, and he had so hoped that he would be able to read the memories of inanimate objects. "Where is it from?" asked Mark. It's a curious thing. From the south, the merchant blinked his eyes in confusion. From the caves. But don't go there. The guild is poking around there now. The guild's name struck him like an electric shock. He'd heard of them. Scavengers, hunters, assassins, marauders. They took artifacts for themselves. And they hated their competition, someone like Mark. He paid for the amulet, bargaining for a couple of gold pieces, and left, hiding his find. On the horizon there was a sign, Lame Jares. The bar was not crowded. At the far end of the room, two plump women were whispering. Judging by their clothes, they were workers from a local farm. 2 tables away from Mark, a group of 3 Vaxians was sitting. As always, they were extremely noisy. The green-skinned, free-eyed brutes were burping, spitting, and slapping the waitress on the quote-unquote soft spot. Typical representatives of their tribe. Uncouth savages, Marcus Actaeon sighed to himself. Any other day he would have sprinted out and taught them a lesson. But not now. A bar fight in Atlanta was not on his agenda. He had wasted enough time. Excuse me, the waitress interrupted his thoughts. Would you like more? A young, blue-eyed blonde stood in front of Mark. Pretty, he would have even hit on her if he had been 10 years younger. The girl was all flushed and wouldn't look him in the eye. She was obviously embarrassed. It was surprising that she even worked in this godforsaken place. Thank you. Mark forced a smile, finishing his coffee. He wiped his face with a handkerchief. Your charlotte is simply delightful, just as delicious as my grandmother's. For a second their gazes met, and the girl blushed even more than before. Thank you, she smiled. I make it my own way. The trick is not to overdo it with, Hey, you! The waitress didn't have time to finish. One of the thugs was already towering behind her. What are you doing here? The bull hiccuped. Then again. You were told to bring us more. And here you are chilling with this. The green-skinned giant gave Mark a contemptuous look and spat in his direction. And then he grabbed the girl by the elbow and dragged her along with him. Mark jumped up and struck the Vaxian in the jaw. The big guy let out a short squeal and fell backwards. His 2 brothers immediately rushed at Actaeon. With a wild roar, as if that should have scared him, but Mark had a different opinion on this matter. He just pulled out a blaster. The Vaxians stopped immediately, as if they had grown into the floor. Looking at each other in bewilderment, the big guys began to assess the situation. They whispered something and rushed to the exit, not even thinking about taking their fallen comrade with them. That's what was to be proved, smiled Marcus Actaeon. Uncouth savages. Mark wandered around New Sand for hours. The streets, paved with sandy glass, cracked under his feet. Above his head were torn awnings, which at least somehow saved him from the scorching sun. Mark walked slowly, carefully examining the counters. You never know what you might need. And the thirst of a collector was seething in him like never before. Who didn't he meet? Imperial deserters fleeing the tyranny of the madman Vastrad the Unbreakable, nomads from Garra, mutants who traded fragments of the Vesuvius meteorite, the largest in the Mesra system. A little Cyclops girl with one eye sold clots of time in vials, hardly real, more like a hologram. Another scam. A gang of 6 people wearing the symbols of the desert clan, Dragon Fangs, blocked the old man's passage, demanding a breath tax. The old man began to wail, throwing up his hands. He said he didn't even have money for food. But the Dragon's Fangs didn't care. One of the gang, the taller one with the thick beard, hit the old man in the solar plexus. The other 3 began to kick the man who was lying down. Mark only sighed languidly and quickly looked away. He passed by. The Dragon's Fangs weren't the clumsy Vaxian thugs from the bar. They were something else entirely. Real killers. Professionals. And a whole gang of them. Mark wouldn't have stood a chance. And he knew it. As his father used to say, always be realistic about your abilities. Such skill will save your life more than once. This was the principle that Mark had tried to adhere to for as long as he could remember. Perhaps that was why he had lasted so long. Around the bend he saw something that immediately caught his eye. A lopsided hut made from rusted metal plates from the hull of an Imperial assault ship, with a roof made from the remains of solar sails. There was no sign. But near the entrance hung a stone mask of Narindel, a sign that inside was a true collector's shop. This fact made Mark Actaeon smile involuntarily. It was the secret symbol of the Interstellar Collectors League, of which he himself had once been a member. True, he had been kicked out because of his excessive ambitions. And to be honest, those old farts were simply jealous of his collection. He entered. And it was as if he had fallen into an antique paradise. The shelves were bursting with oddities. Petrified egg of the three-time dragon, a pendant from the planet Astaris, which sparkles only when someone in the room has deliberately lied. A foggy crystal in which it seems someone was breathing. Don't touch him unless you want to be his next victim. A voice came from the depths. A robot slowly rolled out of the darkness, squeaking. Rusty with a copper jaw, lens-like eyes, and a body covered in patches from other models. The robot's pupils narrowed and the green color of his lenses changed to red. The robot's eyes sparkled. Then everything went quiet. "You are Marcus Actaeon," he said in the icy tones of a sinister robot enslaver from the old Earth movies. "I am Gavael, and you seek the impossible." Mark could only blink. The robot saw right through him. It was as if he had passed through an X-ray scanner, and now this Gavael knew everything about him. "How do you know all this?" Mark asked, not hiding his surprise. "Of course, I've seen a lot of things, but knowing more than is necessary is my privilege," the robot said. "I unseen." Mark Actaeon nodded with a faint smile. The robot spoke in beautiful, mysterious words, but it didn't clarify the situation, and Mark was starting to get annoyed. "I can't stand another boring, arrogant guy. Lousy artificial intelligence. But if you already know what I'm looking for..." Mark took out a tablet and handed it to Gavael. "Then perhaps you can help me." The robot looked at the image of the Chronos Stone for a long time. "The Chronos Stone," the robot said monotonously. "The Chronos Stone," Mark confirmed. "I know something about this stone," Gavael replied. "But this information will come with a price." "Well, here we go," Mark sighed, rolling his eyes. Pause. "So what do you want, piece of iron?" "First of all, respect." The robot's eyes turned red again. "Don't call me a piece of iron." Mark cleared his throat and leaned back. He felt uneasy. Yes, he hastened to reassure Gavael. "Of course. I'm sorry, I won't do it again." The robot's lenses turned green. "Secondly," Gavael continued, clearly pleased with Mark's apology, "tell me what you know about women." Silence reigned. A long, oppressive silence. Mark Actaeon was taken aback. "What do you mean?" "That's it," the robot replied. "Tell me everything you know about women." Mark whistled, crossing his arms over his chest. Well, he smiled. "Why do you need such information? I thought robots didn't do anything like that." "That's true," Gavael interrupted him. "But I need this information. For the collection. You understand, the collection comes first. And I collect everything. Things, knowledge, memory. But I have never heard anything about such creatures called woman before." It took a lot of effort for Marcus Actaeon to hold back his laughter. He certainly didn't expect this from his trip to Atlas. "Well, you know," Mark scratched the back of his head, "a woman is the most beautiful thing in the entire known universe. You have to take care of her, look after her, make her happy. And in return, you know what?" Mark suddenly hit the table with all his might. "And in return, she'll run away with the 10-eyed Actaeon to a shabby planet in the Alderaan system." Mark Actaeon burst into a scream, cleared his throat. "I calmed down a little." "In general," Actaeon spoke in a half-whisper, "the most important thing is to find the one, and live hand in hand, so that you both feel comfortable. Mutual respect, above all." Something like that. Gavael was silent for a moment, then moved to the back shelf. He took out a silver fragment with an engraved glyph. The last trace of the Chronos Stone was the Nulkar mine on the southern edge of Atlan, 5 years ago. Then, that was it. Not a word about the stone. And those who tried to find it either never returned or now serve the guild. Mark wanted to ask more, but suddenly the floor in the hut shook. Day turned to night. Just like that, in a couple of seconds. Mark looked out the window. A huge ship hovered right above the hut. It slowly glided on, a heavy dull roar. 100 meters from Gavael's hut, a guild ship landed, black, angular with a 3-headed snake symbol. A minute later, screams and gunshots echoed through the streets of New Sand. "They're here," Gaviar said. "They know what you're looking for." Mark rushed to the back exit. The shop was already ablaze with alarm holograms. He knew that he did not have the strength for an open fight. It was necessary to run, and the sooner the better, or just wait it out. but time was running out. The next moment his thoughts were interrupted by a thunderous knock on the door. "Oh shit," Mark Actaeon whispered with horror in his eyes. "The damn guild." After the second knock, the door flew off its hinges. 2 guild soldiers burst into the hut, all in black, wearing protective helmets with rifles at the ready. Gavel stood right in the middle of the hallway. "How can I help you?" asked the robot. "You knocked down my door and this?" "Shut your mouth," the soldier in the red helmet barked. "We are looking for a man." He handed over a leaflet with a picture of Marcus Actaeon. Gaver was silent. "Well?" the soldier shouted impatiently. "Did you see?" The second soldier began to examine every nook and cranny of the hut. He broke a couple of porcelain vases, cut up a canvas depicting Agladar the Mighty, the legendary dragon from the Chronicles of Astaris. He even climbed elbow-deep into the fish tank and smashed it to pieces. "I haven't seen anything like that," the robot replied. "No one has come to see me for 2 weeks." Red Helmet was not satisfied with this answer. He followed his comrade's example. In a matter of seconds, they had destroyed Gavel's entire hut. The robot, as if nothing had happened, silently admired this picture. "Well, to hell with you, you dumbass Tinken." The red-helmeted one kicked Gavel right in the place that replaced his face, from which the robot even fell backwards. A few seconds later, there was no trace left of the guild soldiers. The hut was empty. Mark waited a couple more seconds. What a thing. Mark Actaeon brushed off his invisibility cloak and came out from behind the spice cabinet, and we almost got caught. "You better help me, idiot," Gavel said angrily, floundering on his back. It was the first time Mark had heard an aggressive tone in the robot's voice. "Oh, yeah, sorry." It took him a lot of effort to turn Gavel over. He seemed to weigh a ton. When the job was done, he said goodbye to the robot and thanked it for not giving him away. Mark did not hide the fact that he had never encountered anything like this before, but this piece of iron was not as simple as he had thought at first glance. Yes, a robot with advanced artificial intelligence was not something beyond fantasy. That was not the point. Why hadn't it given him away? Gavit had no reason to stand up for him. Quite the contrary. Any other robot, and especially such an advanced one, would have immediately given Mark away. Artificial intelligence always calculates a whole bunch of possible options, and keeping silent about Mark was perhaps the worst of them. If he had given him away, he would have certainly received a subsidy from the guild. They like to reward their lackeys. Mark had heard about it for a long time. However, the guild is no less willing to betray. He wanted to touch Gavel. He needed to practice. Mark wanted to read the memories of more than just living people or animals. He believed that every object carried memory and value. And Gavel, a true collector, had clearly seen a lot. Judging by his battered body, he was at least 200 or 300 years old. How much could he reveal to Mark? And he probably knew much more about the Chronos Stone than he had told. But Mark didn't dare practice on it. He felt that this robot knew too much, and judging by what he saw, it would remain silent. These secrets would remain with him forever, and Marcus Actaeon was sure that this was for the best. That is how it should be. Mark ran out of Gavel's hut into the alley. Guild soldiers continued to disembark from the ship. Moving quickly and silently like shadows, they combed street after street. New Sand was mired in screams and the noise of machine gun fire. A real bloodbath had begun. He knew their style. Guild seekers only took alive those they were ordered to detain. Everyone else was wasted. However, that was not the worst fate. Mark knew what kind of experiments these freaks performed on the detainees. It would be better for this poor guy to die on the spot, but not to be captured by the guild. He ducked into a narrow corridor between the houses, and then he stopped. A sharp headache. Time slowed down. Intuition, honed over the years, did not fail. Danger on the left. Dash, jump, flash. The blaster's discharge passed within centimeters of his head, burning half of the holographic advertising sign and scorching part of the wall. A soldier stepped out of the shadows. Massive, with the three-headed serpent symbol on his shoulder. Mark, already sliding along the floor, grabbed his hand. The leather was in a glove, but there was contact. In an instant, the giant's life was laid bare before him, hiking the sand dunes of Atlanta, torturing the unfortunate. And here it is. An order from the Supreme Council of the Guild. To detain Actaeon if he appears on Atlanta. The name of the customer coded. but the guild icon next to him was pulsing. This confusion cost the soldier his life. Mark pulled out a blaster and fired straight into his neck. The big guy fell to his knees, choking on blood and pressing the wound with both hands. But the noise was too loud. "Damn it!" Mark roared. He heard that a whole crowd was already running towards him, but Mark made it. He ducked into a narrow shaft leading to the city's sewers. He fell onto a metal ladder, tumbled, bruised his shoulder, but survived. My head was throbbing. There were too many of them. "Armach," he whispered into his wristwatch. "You said that you always handle everything yourself?" Armax asked cheerfully. "Damn you," Mark roared. Yes, you win. I need your help." Silence reigned. "And there is nothing shameful about it," answered Armax. "Everyone needs help sometimes. I am in orbit, scanning the city. You have 3 minutes, no more. I will not be able to cover you any longer." "I need to go to the southern mine, Nulkar. That's where the stone was last seen." "Then you'll have to break through the wall," and then the signal disappeared. "Armax, do you hear me? Damn it!" Footsteps were heard from somewhere far away. Mark hid. A female voice was heard in the darkness. "Welcome to Rat City." Chapter 5. The woman who spoke first was short and wore a dark cloak. Her face was hidden by a respirator. Behind her stood 2 stocky men in similar robes. "My name is Layana, and you will follow me." "But I need..." "You will follow me," the woman repeated emphatically. Mark didn't object anymore. He followed her. "Oh yes," Layana handed him a respirator. "Put this on, otherwise you won't last an hour." They walked through a winding tunnel, the walls of which were made from salvaged fragments of ship hulls, old mine fortifications, and the remains of city buildings. Occasionally, they came across old advertising holograms with loud slogans. "Resist the guild or die! Rat City, Atlant's last hope." The passages widened, and suddenly they found themselves in a huge cavity. Rat City. It was a whole underground hive. Several levels of balconies, stairs, suspension bridges. Men and women of different ages were busting about below. Mark spotted an old man in a straw hat giving instructions to 2 workers. There were mutants here, several robots of antediluvian models. A couple of kids were playing tag. It seemed like a completely ordinary city. Just underground, big deal. The upper platforms contained domed shelters, heaters, generators, and in the center, a majestic throne made of engine parts, plastic, and enormous teeth. I wonder who they belonged to. Of course, Mark had heard that the sands of Atlant harbored many different monsters, but to such an extent. "We are those who escaped from under the guild's thumb," Layana interrupted his thoughts. "Some were slaves in the mines, some were scouts who were betrayed and tried to be killed, and some simply wanted to live without masters. Here we are free. Here everyone is equal before each other. Another tale of democracy?" Mark Actaeon grinned. Layana stopped. "You can forget about fairy tales in Atlanta," the woman answered sternly. "Even children here don't know the meaning of this word. They work hard from the cradle to survive. Everyone must contribute." Mark's smile immediately faded. What a beast. The narrow passages between the rusty structures resembled the intestines of a giant organism. The walls were oozing with streaks of unknown origin. Electrical cables hung from the roofs like vines, sometimes twitching in convulsions, giving off sparks. Makeshift altars of cybernetic prosthesis, children's toys, and withered flowers were everywhere. Mark caught unfriendly glances from the locals. He understood immediately that strangers were not welcome here. They continued to descend to the lower tier. We passed by sellers of strong liquor, holographic fortune tellers, and other junk. Music was coming from somewhere above, a monotonous choir singing to a soothing piano. Mark loved such melodies. He could listen to Chopin or Tchaikovsky for hours. It was surprising that there was any need for music in this place. They turned a corner and found themselves in a quieter sector, the Dream Zone, as it was called. There were shops here that sold other people's dreams. You could rent the voice of the dead, spend an evening in the body of another race, relive the entire story of a love that you would never have. Mark stopped at a shop where an old woman sold memories in ampoules. More scammers. His gaze lingered on the sign. Other people's pain, other people's triumph, other people's love or joy, All this can be yours. Stop selling this nonsense, Mark was indignant. Memories are not toys. You can't— Shut up. One of the accompanying thugs pushed Mark in the back. Go forward, quietly. Marcus Actaeon looked and could not believe his eyes. It was a civilization in exile, a refuge built on the ruins of a past life. Excuse me, Mark cleared his throat. Where are we heading? Lyanna pretended not to hear his question. They entered a dark alley, not a single living soul. Ahead, only a massive iron gate. It seemed more designed for giants than for humans. Wait here, Lyanna said quietly. She motioned for the guards to follow her. A second, two. The gates creaked open, so loud that Mark's ears began to ring. The guards entered inside. Lyanna turned sharply to Mark. What are you doing here? The woman asked, looking at him intently. Where are you from? Mark was taken aback. You were silent the whole way, he smiled. And now you're bombarding me with questions all at once. It's not very nice. What is your name? Lyanna asked insistently. Why did you come here? Mark paused. Give his real name? Why not? What's the point of hiding it? At your service, he curtsied, as well as the cuffs would allow. Marcus Actaeon, the most respected collector in the known universe. Who? Lyanna shuddered. Mark blinked. Marcus Actaeon, he repeated less confidently. By the way, it was I who slew the great and mighty dragon Cervixes on Titan, and then borrowed a couple of treasures from his cache. And no one has ever managed to do that before. Lyanna looked at him as if he were crazy. Oh, come on, Mark waved it off. It's clear that you here in your dungeon aren't particularly interested in the affairs above. The woman gave Mark a long, contemptuous look, but said nothing. The next moment, a short, bald man came out from behind the gate. He whispered something in Lyanna's ear and giggled, looking at Mark. That laugh made him feel uneasy. The very sight of that shorty, he was too pale. And those eyes, red pupils. Could he really be a mutant? Lyanna nodded approvingly at the shorty. Come inside, she said to Mark. They're already waiting for you. He found himself in a circular room that resembled a rusty observatory. The walls were lined with old circuit boards, fragments of antediluvian antennas, and tapes of pre-invasion recordings. Light came from patches of phosphorescent moss covering the ceiling and the occasional lamp embedded in pieces of down-killed drones. In the center was a tall, semicircular table with 7 people sitting around it. 7 silhouettes, all different. A man with a semi-mechanical face and a voice module instead of a larynx. A woman in an old combat exoskeleton with Atlas symbols carved into her chest. A robot with a face made of 3 rotating screens, each with a different emotion. A gray-haired mutant with 6 fingers on each hand. A young man, incredibly young, with translucent skin through which veins and bones shone through. The other 2 were hidden in shadow. This was the Supreme Council of Rat City. Sit down, one of them said, without pointing to a specific place. Mark walked over to the stool, sitting down confidently, as if he didn't care who was looking at him. One of the guards removed his handcuffs. Thank you, Mark smiled, although it was unnecessary. You came from the surface, said a soft female voice, and there is blood behind you. You killed a guild fighter. It was amazing. They seemed to be speaking a common intergalactic language, but Mark could hardly distinguish the words. It was some strange accent that he had never heard before. He wanted to kill me, Actaeon answered calmly. And maybe not just me. He knew my name, and that's a problem. He watched the council's reaction. They remained silent, allowing him to continue. However, Mark shrugged, you know what the guild is. I saw your posters in the city. You are fighting the guild yourself. What does it matter to you that I killed one of them? On the contrary, you should praise me, maybe even recommend me for an award. Who are you? That your name means anything at all, the 6-fingered mutant hissed, clicking his nails on the iron plate. Mark paused. I am the one who is looking for the Chronos Stone. A murmur of surprise echoed through the hall. The council members began to whisper. One of the screens on the robot's face changed its image to an alarming symbol, a red triangle. Then everything went quiet. There have been many who have searched for this terrible thing, the old exoskeleton responded. None have returned. The stone carries a curse with it. And you want to drag it here? No, why drag him here? Mark sighed. His patience was at its limit. He was wasting too much time here.
I'm looking for him for my friend.
What other friend? Asked the robot. That's none of your business, mister. Mark Actaeon crossed his arms over his chest and wanted to lean back on the stool, but remembered in time that the stool had no back. All three of the robot's screens were glowing with red triangles. He really pissed him off. In any case, Mark cleared his throat, sooner or later the guild will descend on your city. They are also looking for the stone. I think they somehow found out that I came to Atlan specifically for it. And if they find the stone earlier, then the end will come, said a voice from the shadows. Measured, it pronounced each letter with special pedantry. True, nodded Mark Actaeon. The comrade in the shadows speaks the absolute truth. Everything will come to an end. Not only Atlanta and your city. The council began to whisper again. Why should we believe that you are not an agent of the guild? The man with a half-mechanical face slapped his palm on the table. Maybe you yourself want to use the stone for something bad. Bad? Mark almost burst out laughing. You speak like an amateur. How dare you? The mutant with 6 fingers jumped up. Who the hell are you? He's Mark Actaeon, said Lyanna, standing to the side of Mark. Whatever that means. That name doesn't mean anything to me, the robot said in an indifferent tone. Me too, the woman in the exoskeleton confirmed. Mark rolled his eyes. Yes, I already understood. You are not very enlightened here, as I see. He gritted his teeth. But there is no need to worry. I assure you I do not need the stone, and whoever will use it is aware of all the risks. Well, at least I hope so. However, what choice do you have? Either I find the stone or the guild. He's right, said the second voice in the shadows, and then it came into the light. We have no other choice. It was the Supreme Chairman, an elderly man with a cool, composed look. Lyanna will go with you. The Supreme Chairman's voice echoed throughout the hall. But father, the woman leaned forward but immediately stopped. Lyanna is the daughter of the Supreme Chairman? I thought so. That's how she acted. A typical, wayward, arrogant woman. And she also said that everyone here is equal. Yeah, right. It's easy for the daughter of the Supreme to say that. This is not up for discussion. An oppressive silence reigned. Then it's decided, let's move. Mark clapped his hands and stood up from the stool, but then one of the guards forcibly set him back down. Mark raised his palms up, as if to say, I surrender. I'm sitting, I got it. Just without hands. The council began to whisper again. Do you know where to look for the stone? Do you have a trace? The Supreme Chairman took the floor again. I know, Mark nodded. Nulkar. An anxious murmur ran through the hall. What is it? Sighed Actaeon. What is it this time? Let me guess. There are demons living in Nulkar. Worse, answered the woman in the exoskeleton. Death reigns there. Oh, so that's how it is, Mark smiled broadly. Well, we'll sort this out somehow. You know, I'm used to cleverly avoiding meetings with this bony lady. It's an old mine, the Supreme Chairman began. Officially, it hasn't been working for a long time. In fact, all the guild caravans go there. We tried to get through, no one returned. But if you want to go there, we'll show you the way. Lyanna knows the way. He looked at Lyanna and said, move out, immediately. They left Rat City at night. Although on the surface of Atlant the concept of night is relative, constant dust storms prevented the sun or stars from being seen. 3 went with them. Lyanna, a bony old man nicknamed Legion, once the guild's navigator and now its main enemy, and a brute in a black mask, simply called Gog. If they spot us, they'll send drones, Legion warned. And they'll send the cleaners after them. They don't take prisoners. I know, Mark muttered. Their path ran through an old system of canals and mines, laid out during the heyday of New Sand. Mark, watching Lyanna confidently choose her route, realized that these people really knew Atlan. Be that as it may, but you could say he was lucky that he fell into the sewers and ended up in Rat City. The devil knows how long he would have searched for Nulkar himself, and even Armax wasn't responding. On the 5th hour of their journey, they came to the ruins of an old turbine station. Once upon a time, energy was distilled here from the planet's underground currents. Now, only the wind whistled in the remains of the turbines. We're close. The guarded zone will begin beyond that ridge. Lyanna pointed to the dark silhouettes of towers in the distance. Nulkar. Chapter 7. The road to Nulkar turned out to be much longer than it seemed at first. Atlas is a treacherous planet. It lives in its sands, in the rustlings, in the barely perceptible pulse of the desert. It seems that even the stones here could tell their own story. No wonder that at night thoughts come to mind, too strange to share them out loud. Last night, Mark had a dream. It would have been fine, but he had never dreamed before. Literally, not once. And this was the first time it had happened on Atlanta. He stood in pitch darkness. The silence was deafening, as if he were in a vacuum. This realization made him uncomfortable. Mark jumped up and ran forward, but the darkness did not end. He ran and ran, but it was all in vain. Still nothing. There were no footsteps, no voices. He could not even hear his own breathing.
Finally, he fell to his knees and clutched his head. A wave of indescribable horror washed over him. And then the space shook from a shrill female scream. After which Mark Actaeon woke up, all in sweat, gasping for air.
"It's all the stone," Legion, sitting by the fire, said in a monotonous voice. "It knows you're coming for it, and it starts sending you all sorts of things." Mark didn't sleep a wink that night.
They camped in a shelter made from the wreckage of a transport lift, half embedded in a dune. The wind whipped up fine ash, swirling it into rings. Gog started a fire, a small flame of fuel pellets. They sat in silence until a sound was heard in the distance. A chilling howl. Mark tensed up. What was that? Lyanna didn't answer. She just turned to Legion. He covered his face with a hood and said in a muffled voice, "Sarhad." There are more and more of them. They didn't go out so far before.
But something shifted in the deep layers. Something woke up. Underground creatures? Mark clutched the blaster. I don't know what else to expect here. It's not as simple as it seems at first glance, Legion answered thoughtfully. The Sarhads are closer to intelligent beings who are just a little different from us. The Sarhad doesn't just eat flesh, he sucks the soul out of you. Everything without a trace. Leaving the body an empty vessel, without a name, without a past. As if the person never existed. Only a husk. Mark glanced sideways at Lyanna, but she was already sitting with her eyes closed, listening to the wind. Or maybe something else. "So that's why you covered Rat Town with those Avalar alloy plates, I noticed as we were going down to the lower level," he said. "It helps you stay hidden from not only the League, but any other unwanted guests?" Legion looked at Mark, nodded slowly. "You are not as stupid as you seem." "I'm not trying to seem smart," Mark crossed his legs. "Everything happens by itself. But be that as it may," Legion continued, "you got into us, and quite easily." Because Varson, the young patrolman, fell asleep, forgetting to close one of the hatches. Yes, a dreamy smile lit up Mark's face. He put his hands behind his head. "I can do that. You know, I'm often very lucky." Gog suddenly stood up.
The brute stood motionless like a statue peering into the darkness. Then he said quietly, almost in a whisper, "Someone is coming." Everyone jumped up. "Don't..." And indeed, between the hills glowing with the reflection of the fire, three figures appeared. They moved in jerks. They fell, then rose. "Sarhads," Legion croaked. "Quickly, turn off the lights." They put out the fire in a hurry, but it was too late. One of the figures noticed them. It rushed forward, too fast, too inhuman. She got right in front of him before Mark could fire. He touched the Sarhad's hand for a second and his whole life flashed before his eyes. Ordinary, human. But it clearly belonged to someone else, because the creature Mark touched was no longer human. The blaster whistled. Lyanna was hit right in the head. The figure fell over on its side. The others disappeared in an instant, as if they had never existed. "What the hell is this planet?" Mark exhaled. "Are you okay?" Lyanna extended her hand to him. He hesitated for a second, but accepted the help. "Thank you." Mark Actaeon cleared his throat. Legion approached the body, examined it. Then, with a tremor in his voice, he said, "He was alive an hour ago. There's the guild token, and now see for yourself." Mark sat down. The body really was empty, as if everything had been burned out from the inside except the shell. Glass eyes, no pupils, only emptiness, and a faint smell of ozone. "Something very ancient beneath Nulkar is awakening," Legion said, rising. "The stone was a seal, and now everyone is looking for it, even those who should not know of its existence." Silence, and only Atlas, ancient and eternal, continued to whisper in the darkness. Chapter 8. The desert had changed again. Instead of the usual dunes, they were surrounded by charred rock cliffs, as if scorched by an eternal flame. Above them towered the enormous, almost organic structures of New Rome, a parasitic city that had grown into the rocky outcrops. It was a gigantic metropolis, as if it had come from the pages of legends about old Earth. A crazy mixture of ancient colonnades and giant walls, entwined with barbed wire under tension.
"We don't have time to go around," Leanna sighed. "We'll have to go through New Rome."
"I don't really like your tone," Mark frowned. "No wonder," Legion chuckled. "New Rome is a bigger hole than New Sand. On any other day we should have bypassed it as soon as possible. But Leanna's right. We don't have time. The guild may already be at Nulkar." They were stopped at the approaches to the city. 6 armored vehicles with the emblem of the Order of Freedom, a white sword on a blue background.
"The soldiers of the Order are directly subordinate to the authorities of New Rome." A man in black armor and a silver robe appeared, Procurator Vitus Corvinus. His face was half covered by a mask scanner.
"The man in the grey cloak," he said, checking the holographic image with Mark. "The mark matches. Come with us, for questioning." "Excellent," grumbled Actaeon. "Here I am again, as always. What's the matter exactly?"
Leanna was indignant, but the soldiers immediately grabbed her. The enraged Gog screamed hysterically and rushed to the rescue, but a discharge from a paralyzing blaster knocked the brute off his feet, as well as the Legion. At the same second, Mark quickly tapped on the touchscreen of his wristwatch.
"Armox!
He roared.
Damn it, where are you? Get me out right now!"
But Mark didn't have time to finish. Behind him, 2 soldiers of the Order were already towering. "You have the right to remain silent," said one of them and hit Marcus Actaeon on the head with a titanium club. The only light in the room was a dim fluorescent lamp above the table, in front of which sat the bound Marcus Actaeon.
"What the hell? When will I stop waking up beaten and tied up?" When the bolts of the massive metal door clanged and 2 men in uniform entered the room, Mark's lips spread into a grin.
One of the men took the empty chair in front of him. The other stood a little further away. "How are you feeling?" Procurator Vitus Corvinus ran his hand over his hair, which was shiny with varnish. Mark licked his dry lips and swallowed greedily. This action immediately caused pain in his throat. "Great," he continued to smile. "Thank you for your hospitality, but I have to go now. If only I could free my hands, I would get out of your town as quickly as possible."
"I don't want to be late for dinner."
The procurator was silent for a moment, and then burst into loud laughter. "Oh, I admit I didn't expect that." He shook his finger and scratched the bridge of his nose. "People like you, as we say, wanderers, are usually thought of as some kind of soulless and uncouth savages." Vitus Corvinus glanced over his shoulder and smiled at the man at the door.
"What a funny guy you have."
The soldier stood motionless, dressed in black armor, his face hidden by his helmet. From his belt hung the titanium baton he had used to hit Mark over the head a few hours earlier. "You know," Actaeon made a painful face, clutching the back of his head. "That was very painful. I can even file a lawsuit. You can," Viti nodded, "but you won't." In the dim light of the lamp, the procurator's face was distorted by an angry grimace. "However, I won't lie. You don't have many options, Mr. Actaeon." "I'm flattered, of course."
"You've heard of me."
Mar broke into a blissful smile. "You've probably read about my exploits on Titan." "I hasten to disappoint you," the procurator retorted. "But I heard your name for completely different reasons. You're suspected of murdering His Holiness the Baron." Silence reigned in the room. "What?" Actaeon shuddered. "This is unthinkable. I've only been on Atlanta for a couple of days, and have only managed to visit New Sand. I have no idea who this Baron of yours is. Information from our intelligence agents suggests otherwise." Vitus Corvinus moved the tablet. A scene flickered on the screen showing a man who looked very much like Mark Actaeon shooting a bald, fat gentleman point blank. Then he tore some chain off his neck and disappeared into the darkness. "You weren't as careful as you thought." "Believe me," Mark almost shouted. "If it were me, you wouldn't have found any traces." The procurator fell silent. He stared at Mark. The staring match went on for long seconds, which made Actaeon feel uneasy. There was something he didn't like about this man. Too cunning. Mark quickly realized that he couldn't be talked into it. "Yeah, it's a lousy situation." Corvinus's lips stretched into a wicked smile. "I like you," the procurator burst out laughing. "You stand so stubbornly on your own. But, you know, our investigation is stalled. All that remains is the Baron's body, found in the central tower, and the engraved inscription on the wall. Chronos remembers." "I see," Actaeon drawled with feigned theatricality. "What could this mean?" "I'm sure you know," the procurator's eyes flashed with an unnatural light. "How should I know?" Mark shrugged and waved his hand. "You're flattering me. I have no idea about any Chronos. Obviously I was set up.
I have many envious people, and in general, the Baron was killed by a shot to the heart from a proton blaster. Vitius Corvinus continued to stand his ground. Shot from a distance of 2 meters, quickly, without hesitation, like a professional mercenary. Actaeon sighed wearily.
Listen, comrade. He leaned forward. To be honest, your games are getting on my nerves.
The soldier behind immediately rushed towards Mark. It's all right, Claudius, the procurator stopped him with a gesture. Our guest has no manners.
It's not his fault.
Mark felt himself boiling inside. He was already fed up with this pompous, licked idiot.
But I am ready to meet you halfway, Corvinus smiled. If you really have nothing to do with it, or, as you say, you were set up, then I am ready to give you a chance. Help us with the investigation of this case.
And you will be released, I give you my word. The procurator paused and then added, The Baron's killer must stand trial. It sounded too ominous. Oh, Mark didn't like it when people spoke to him in that tone. Why was everyone so angry?
He leaned back in his chair, and he smiled.
And why should I do this? Actaeon shrugged. I have enough of my own things to do. I don't have time to... Otherwise, you and your companions will be executed at dawn. Silence reigned.
And you know how to convince, Mr. Procurator, sighed Marcus Actaeon.
Chapter 9. They reunited in the local prison canteen. Lyanna didn't even touch the food. She thought they had been poisoned. Gog devoured flatbread after flatbread.
What kind of Baron? Mark shuddered, swallowing a piece of meat with difficulty. He didn't even want to know whose it was.
Can you imagine? I was accused of his death. What impudence, and yet I have an alibi.
However, I realized that telling about Red City wasn't the best idea.
You understood correctly, Lyanna grunted angrily.
But that's not even the point, Actaeon continued. The procurator showed me the footage from the cameras, and this fucking double really does look like me. Exactly. I don't know who or what needed to set me up, but it looks like he did a great job.
Maybe you really did kill the Baron. Lyanna narrowed her eyes sarcastically. Why should we believe you? Maybe you arrived on Atlant a long time ago.
You're generally some kind of shady one. Go to... Let's leave the strife. Legion interrupted them. They won't help us get out of here. Whatever it was, Mark knew the old man was right.
Golden words, he nodded, and I am of the same opinion. Lyanna raised her head in resentment and turned away. Oh, these women. The Legion began its story. The Baron is the largest landowner in Atlant. Hundreds of settlements, dozens of markets. His income is scary to even imagine, but I think it amounts to tens of millions of gold a year, and it's constantly growing. Of course, his main rival is the Guild. They are constantly at odds with the Baron. They raid each other, violate the agreement on the inviolability of borders, and all of them, as one, have an insatiable thirst for treasure. Oh, I respect that, Mark smiled.
But if the Baron is really dead?
Nothing lasts forever under the moon, Actaeon shrugged. The Baron also loved to collect the heads of slain enemies. Lyanna, who had been pretending to be asleep, suddenly interjected.
Marcus Actaeon's smile faded.
Well, I hope my head isn't the most valuable exhibit, Mark muttered, peering into the murky watery porridge on his plate. He winced and quickly set it aside.
Okay, Actaeon jumped up from his seat. I've had enough. Let's get this over with and get the hell out of here. We still have to look for Nulkar, if you haven't forgotten.
Half an hour later, they were already in the Baron's chambers.
The Baron's rooms resembled the tomb of an ancient titan. Silence, saturated with power and fear, pressed on the chest from the first steps. Mark walked first, followed by Procurator Vitius and 2 android analysts from the New Rome Investigation Department. Lyanna remained at the entrance. She still did not trust anyone, and remained to cover the rear, just in case. In the center of the room stood a massive chair made of volcanic glass and the bones of desert lizards. Above it was a triangular holographic chandelier, pulsating with a soft blue light. The walls were covered with brocade fabrics embroidered with schematic maps of the desert. Everything here was excessive and eerie in its luxury. Mark ran his fingers across the ceramic biometallic alloy table where the Baron's personal console lay dormant. Nobody knew the password, said the Procurator. I don't think you'll need this tablet.
On one of the walls, Mark noticed a display case with heads, real, mummified, covered with a protective varnish, not a drop of dust.
Mark certainly respected his fellow collectors, but this was too much. Your Baron is a sick bastard. He felt uneasy about these fucking heads. It was like they were watching his every goddamn move. The Baron was a collector of a special kind, said Vitius Corvinus with a grim smile. Mark's confusion did not escape his gaze.
of the living and the dead. Yes, I already understood. Actaeon forced a smile. Thanks for the explanation. Suddenly Mark stopped.
His gaze fell on a bas-relief in the form of a sandworm with an open mouth. Right in the monster's throat was a microslot. He inserted the universal analyzer. Mark walked slowly around the bas-relief, shimmering with a soft greenish glow. In a corner, barely perceptible to the eye, the glyphs on the floor beneath the Baron's chair began to pulse slightly. They responded to a presence or some signal left in the air. Actaeon knelt down and touched the slabs. Warm. Too warm for marble stone. What did you find there? Viti hung behind. Oh, just like that, Mark muttered uncertainly. Nothing special. And then he pressed on the plate. A dull click. A round hatch slid out from under the chair. Covered in brass ligature, it looked more like the entrance to an ancient machine capsule than a door. The hologram above him blinked. The legacy of the unworthy is death. Idiotic pathos, Mark muttered and sharply pulled the hatch upward. A narrow shaft opened up before them, leading downwards, framed by smooth metal walls. Engraved on the wall, He-17, the mark of an old guild research lab that had been closed for decades. It looks like the Baron had his own skeletons. Mark leaned toward the hatch. There's a platform going down, the procurator noted. He pressed a button and the elevator rose smoothly. The platform was designed for exactly two. When they went down, they were met by a corridor made of dull polished alloy. There were footprints on the floor, quite fresh. They went deeper, and around the corner a faint light flickered. Whatever the Baron kept here, it was more important than all his palaces. Otherwise, why such complications? Mark said quietly. At the end of the corridor, they saw another room, round with a glass dome, wherein a transparent capsule hovered a corpse. The Baron. Dead. The mechanisms around him kept him in stasis. What the... Viti Corvinus froze. And I told you from the very beginning, Mark exclaimed triumphantly. Something is wrong here. First they cloned me and now this. A setup. I don't understand anything, Viti muttered detachedly. There was no trace left of the Procurator's previous confidence. They came close to the capsule. The prosecutor tried in every possible way to open it, but to no avail. Access denied. It seems, Mr. Prosecutor, Mark grinned sarcastically, that you are not the most important person here, but Corvinus ignored his sarcasm. Something doesn't add up. Without hesitation, Mark touched the glass of the capsule. A fine tremor ran through his body. Click! The capsule cracked. All visible space was filled with a blinding radiance. The Baron's body burst into small pieces. A few seconds later, a skull-shaped helmet was in its place. Without hesitating for a second, Mark kicked the Procurator in the solar plexus. Oh, you! Writhing in pain, Viti fell backwards. Yes, me. Mark rushed towards the helmet. And then he froze in place. There was some object sparkling under the helmet. What is this? Actaeon slowly raised his helmet. A small broken artifact appeared before his eyes. A black, translucent sphere with cuts that looked like glyphs. This is a fragment of Chronos.
Mark whispered. Viti was immediately nearby.
Aha, and you said you didn't know anything about any Chronos.
The Procurator spoke into the radio.
Gods!
Wait a minute!
Mark raised his hands up. You don't understand. But Mark didn't have time to finish. There was a crash overhead. Then another. The God? The Procurator repeated less confidently. But no one responded. At that moment, the Baron's console signaled. It turned on. On the screen, there was only one message. I knew you would come, Marcus Actaeon. The stone is closer than you think. Damn it, Mark was taken aback. What's going on here? He grabbed the artifact. And then it began. Chapter 10. The walls of the room suddenly began to shake. The entire visible space was filled with bright light. Footsteps echoed in the passage from which they had come. Mechanical. Heavy. These are not my people, Viti whispered. There was panic in his voice. A figure slowly emerged from the darkness of the corridor. Tall, thin. On the polished armor was the guild emblem, crossed out by 3 red stripes. Something new. A deserter? Mark exhaled. No. Worse, the Procurator muttered, emerging from behind Mark's shoulder. It's the Keeper of Chronos. Who? Mark was taken aback, slowly raising his blaster.
The machines that remain from the first program. They serve no one but time.
And Chronos, Viti stepped back. If they are here, then you have in your hands one of the lost fragments of the Chronos Stone. The real one.
This is amazing, Marcus Actaeon whispered.
We are trapped with the gods of the clock.
Mark instinctively pressed the sphere to his chest and immediately felt its surface melt into his skin. He screamed. The world shook. The room dissolved.
The familiar faces, Legion, Gog, Leon, even the damn procurator, all vanished, displaced by another light.
He found himself inside. Inside what? I didn't know. White space, no walls, no ceiling. Time didn't matter here. Only the voice.
You have awakened the first segment. The gate is open.
Who are you?
You yourself, but different. When the others come, the choice will be yours. The rest? The voice disappeared. The world turned upside down again.
Mark woke up on the cold tiles, panting, sweating. The Chronos Stone fragment was in his hands again, but now it was glowing faintly from within. The room was empty. Leanna lay unconscious to the side. Legion and Gog were nearby. All that was left of the Procurator was a bloody trail leading to the dark opening. Mark stood up looking at the pulsating sphere. If you are Chronos, he whispered, show me the way. Darkness took over the room again, slowly, like fog enveloping the space. Meanwhile, Lyanna, Legion and Gog came to their senses. Where are we? Lyanna shuddered, holding her head. And why is my head splitting so damn much?
It looks like we're everywhere at once, Mark answered quietly.
That's right. Legion ran his hand along the wall. We are outside of time. But the old man didn't have time to finish. His voice was drowned out by the deafening stomping. The guardian of Chronos, he was here again. Don't make a mistake, a mechanical voice came from somewhere far away. Don't touch time. Mark fell into oblivion. He woke up under a bright, scorching sun, again the endless deserts of Atlanta. There was no trace left of New Rome. Marcus Actaeon rose slowly to his feet. Gog and the Legion were packing up camp, preparing to continue their journey. Well, you slept for a long time today. He turned to Leanna.
Too abruptly. What's wrong with you?
He didn't know what to say. He didn't know what the hell was going on here. It's just, I had a nightmare. Leanna gave him a long, contemptuous look. You are so strange, she waved it off. I don't even want to get into it. Mark drained the water skin in one gulp, but it was not enough. His head was splitting, his hands were shaking. He approached the Legion. Muttered Actaeon. Listen, when are we going to pass New Rome? The old man put out the fire, carefully put the pots in the bag, and only then noticed Mark. New Rome? Legion stared at him in surprise. Are you out of your mind? It went underground over a century ago. What are we supposed to do there? These words pierced Mark like a spear. He felt sick. Chapter 11. The whole next day Mark was absolutely broken. Bad thoughts were creeping into his head. He still couldn't understand what had happened. Where did the boundaries of reality end and illusions reign? A jump in time? Or just hallucinations? No. After all, the fragment of the Chronos Stone remained with him, and that meant that everything was real. He tried not to touch the stone. He hid it away in his backpack and tried not to think about it. But it was beyond his strength. The stone was constantly whispering things, getting into his head, into the most secret places of his memory and mind. The stone knew everything about him, and sometimes it seemed that it knew even more than Mark himself, constantly slipping him terrible memories from his childhood. And with each passing day, it became harder and harder for Mark to bear. But that was not even the worst thing. The fragment of the stone knew things that had not yet happened, but were only coming. Or maybe it was deliberately trying to confuse Mark, deceived him. And all for what? Surely to prevent Mark from reaching Nulkar and taking possession of the rest of the stone. There was no other explanation. If a shard can do such things, what can you expect from the whole Chronos Stone? The words of the Guardian of Chronos just wouldn't leave my head. I am you yourself, but different. When the others come, the choice will be yours. Don't make a mistake. Don't touch time. What did all this mean? But he knew one thing for sure. He wouldn't tell the others that he had the stone fragment. Mark didn't fully trust these people, and it was unknown what their reaction would be. What if they took the fragment, killed Mark, and returned back to Red City? No, he couldn't risk it. Mark had already regretted that he had taken on this damn thing. No million gold pieces were worth it, not even 10.
And this lady in the veil had seemed somehow murky to him right away. Something bad was coming from her. But it was too late to whine now. He had to see it through to the end, as always.
Mark Actaeon didn't know how to do it any other way, no matter how difficult it was. If only Armax had gotten in touch. But it was all in vain. There was still no contact. They had gone too far. The real wilds of Atlas.
Mark tried to concentrate, but his thoughts were spinning in circles, like a ship lost in a meteor belt. Even Lyanna's words, usually so sharp and direct, seemed like muffled echoes.
"You need to rest," she said, casting a quick glance at him. "You don't look well." He didn't recognize the old Lyanna. She had become too soft. "I'm fine," Mark muttered, although he himself didn't believe it. They had been walking for days. Their path led past endless dunes where giant drilling machines had once stood. Now everything was frozen, as if Atlas himself were holding its breath. At night, they were surrounded by a deathly silence that made Mark uneasy. Legion sometimes lagged behind, increasingly lost in his own thoughts. Gog was silent, as usual. Only Lyanna held herself confidently. Mark could see that she wanted to impress her father, who had sent her on this mission. She was eager to reach Nulkar, no matter what. The 10th day had passed since leaving Rat City. Night had fallen. By the fire, Mark heard the voice again. "You are afraid of yourself, not me. You hid it, you chose it, you tore it apart."
"I am just a mirror, Marcus Actaeon."
He jumped up, almost knocking over the pot of food. "What's wrong with you?" Lyanna blinked.
"It's okay," Mark waved it off. "I'm just tired."
Legion raised an eyebrow. "Atlas changes people," he croaked. "And the closer we get to Nulkar, the harder it will be." "Yes," Mark whispered. "I think you're right." The old man thought for a moment. It seemed he wanted to answer something else, but he didn't. The next night they camped at the foot of a gravity crater. Above them, the stars were silent. No words, just the crackle of the fire and the faint scraping sounds in the distance, as if the rocks were talking to each other. "There used to be a temple here," Legion muttered. "One of the ancients, before the guild arrived. They say it was built by those who heard the voice of Atlas himself." "I'm the only one who hears voices," Mark chuckled, rubbing his temple. "Especially when I haven't slept for the 3rd night in a row." Lyanna was silent. She sat a little to the side, looking at the stars. That night none of the squad could sleep, and in the morning they saw Piki, black, pointed, like the petrified fangs of a monster that had pierced the crust of the planet. Mist spread through the ravines between them. Somewhere in the distance, a tower with a crooked spire rose up. "There," Lyanna pointed. "Underneath it lies Nulkar," Mark exhaled. "If I don't go crazy in the next couple of hours, maybe we'll get there." Chapter 12. Mark found himself in a world covered in mirror lakes. He had never seen anything like it before. The lakes reflected not only his image, but also the light of distant galaxies that stretched across the sky like golden threads. The world was quiet and unhurried, but there was something majestic in its silence. As soon as Mark stepped onto the surface, his attention was drawn to the enormous stone statues standing in 2 rows. Their shapes were incomprehensible. He did not believe that a person could build something like that. It seemed that the statues were carved out of time itself. Mark realized that this world was too ancient. The builders of these statues had managed to reach the peak of their civilization's power, then their empire fell apart. And all this at a time when dinosaurs still reigned on old Earth. Mark wandered for a long time among the giant statues. And the longer he looked at them, the more clearly he understood where he had actually ended up. It was an ancient library, but not in the form familiar to humanity. Each statue represented one of the extinct galaxies. He had never seen anything like it before. Mark approached one of the statues and lit a flashlight. It was an elderly man with a beard and short hair. Caesarius Phi, Emperor of the Veclonian Empire, Sedes Ochishiniven AD, 800 Corteninavin AD.
AD? What kind of chronology is this? I don't understand anything.
And this was the first time he had heard about the Veclon Empire. The Emperor's entire body was covered in bas-reliefs of bizarre beasts. Mark pointed his tablet's camera at one of the monsters. An error popped up on the screen. Can be. His database contained a bestiary with millions of beasts from different galaxies, but the tablet screen kept flashing the following message. "Error," came Armax's monotonous voice. "There is no data on this object. Try again in a while." He was starting to dislike this place. Mark was starting to feel uneasy. "It's time to get out of here." He took a few steps and a door appeared in front of him. It seemed to be cut out of light, transparent and motionless, but it reflected an entire era, as if in a mirror. Mark did not know what exactly was hidden behind it. Perhaps the answer to all his questions, perhaps a new unknown reality. With each passing moment, the doubt in his heart receded.
Mark's curiosity got the better of him, and he continued on his way. Soon he found himself in a new place, in a world where time flowed upwards. Time flowed not from the past to the future, but in the opposite direction, returning all living things to their origins. The stars that seemed dead began to flare up again. Moreover, they became brighter than before, gained strength. Mark was enchanted by this amazing place, but he knew that he should not linger here. The local order was not for his reality. One day, the Orpheus was pulled toward a planet with turquoise oceans and purple mountains. When Mark landed, the air was filled with the scent of fragrant wisteria. Then, from somewhere, a mournful melody flowed. It seemed to be the voice of a young girl, like the song of a mermaid taken from the pages of fairy tales of old Earth. There were no cities or other architectural structures familiar to his eyes. But as soon as Mark took a few steps, the surface under his feet began to change. Crystal flowers grew from the ground, taking the forms of his memories. He saw the faces of friends long left in the dust of distant galaxies, and distinguished voices that he had not heard for centuries. He boarded his ship again and headed out into the vastness, not knowing where his next leap would take him. Perhaps he would find himself again in a place where the sky was dotted with unknown stars and the world seemed so strange that you might have fallen into a dream. A bright flash of light, a small funnel formed in the air above the desert. Looking around, Mark slowly floated forward. An endless desert opened up before his eyes. The funnel continued to pulsate in the air for some time. "I hope," said Mark, cleaning the blade that had gleamed in the sun from the blood, "that you weren't lying." Mark Actaeon spread the fingers of his right hand, and with his palm absorbed the funnel, fluorescent with a soft emerald hue. He shot up and flew forward over the vast expanse of the desert. His scarlet robe fluttered in the wind, his eyes watered from the airflow. Mark pulled his hood over his head and continued moving. As he flew forward, he left behind a light emerald glow. It hung in the air for a while, and then gusts of wind scattered the remains over the desert. Soon, giant stone structures appeared on the horizon. One of the fallen towers stuck its sharp spire into a gentle sandy hill. Mark swooped down to the half-ruined castle. Sliding across the sand, he tumbled over a ravine with a deft movement and found himself inside. The corners of Actaeon's lips spread into a satisfied grin. In the very center of the room, there was a marble pedestal on which a small emerald cube sparkled. The Chronos Stone. "Finally!" Mark exhaled, approaching the pedestal. For a few seconds, he gazed in fascination at the object that captivated him with its beauty. Various images alternated on the surface of the cube. The rise and fall of entire empires, orderly ranks of marching warriors, joy and sorrow, the transience of life and the infinity of death. The universe itself appeared before his eyes. An echo of jubilant laughter swept across the stone walls of the abandoned castle. Mark's eyes sparkled with the thirst for power and might that filled his entire being. At that moment, Nom already imagined himself as the crowned ruler of the universe. Millions and millions of servants bowed before his shining face, monuments were erected in his honor, entire planets and galaxies were named. Touching the cube, Mark burst into a bright flame. It was a short squeal. A light breeze scattered a pile of ash into the air. The abandoned castle was silent. And then he woke up, all in sweat, gasping for air. Mark quickly looked around. Dawn was already approaching. "Be strong, son," Legion said by the fire. "It will all be over soon." "I doubt it," Mark thought. "It's just the beginning." Chapter 13. They reached the outskirts of Nulkar at dawn. Mark felt a sharp pain all over his body, and he knew it was all because of that damn piece of stone he had been keeping for days. With the first glimmer of light, they stood on a ridge of rocks, with ruins spread out below. A huge ring of fallen towers, broken columns, shattered spherical domes, enormous obelisks, spiral arches, half-ruined geometric patterns of ancient buildings. Everything was covered by the centuries-old sands of Atlantis. "We are here," said Leanna. Legion peered out at the horizon. He was muttering something under his breath, as if checking with an inner voice. Gog was silent, clutching a double-barreled rifle.
His mask gleamed in the flickering light. And where to look for the stone? Mark pulled out a holographic tablet, but the image jumped and distorted. You won't find it here with instruments, Legion said hoarsely. The Chronos Stone is hidden, not just physically, it escapes perception. If you don't know how to look, you'll never see it, even if it's right under your feet. So, search blindly? Mark snorted. Not exactly. Legion pulled a small cylinder from his bosom and pressed a button. A projection appeared in the air, old, trembling, as if filmed by a dying drone. There was a figure on it, a robot, the same one Mark had spoken to in New Sand, and next to it was a stone. It lay on an altar of wet quartz, covered in spiral symbols. This was taken in the lower sectors, under the southern dome, Legion continued, but there's only one way in, through the heart of the temple, and it's sealed.
For hundreds of years now. And who closed it? The stone itself, its protection. Nulkar greeted them in silence. They stood at the foot of a huge tower that towered over the rest of the ruins, black as if scorched by time. This tower had not fallen. Neither sandstorms, nor erosion, nor marauders had touched it one iota over the centuries. The walls were smooth, but if you look closely, they were covered with glyphs that shimmered in the sun. The Legion exhaled. We found it. The heart of Nulkar. That's not an entrance, Lyanna muttered, peering at the smooth surface. That can't be an entrance, right? It's a portal, Mark said, feeling the fragment of the Chronos Stone begin to vibrate inside his backpack. He got it. What the hell? Lyanna shuddered and immediately pointed the blaster at Mark. Gog, without thinking, did the same. A fragment of stone, Legion muttered in fascination. Amazing. And when were you going to tell us? Lyanna started shouting. What are you doing? Now is not the time, Marcus Actaeon answered in a whisper. Don't bother me. He came closer. The stone itself tore itself out of his hand and seemed to reach for the glyphs. One of the symbols on the wall lit up. Then a second. Then the entire surface. The tower hummed. The air smelled of ozone. The glyphs lit up in a single pulse, and an entrance opened before them. A round arch, as if carved from reality itself. Beyond it, a dark tunnel, filled with pale light and some kind of sound. Or rather, this sensation was much deeper. Like music that you feel on your skin, as if it had always been an integral part of you. Mark took a step forward. If anyone gets to the whole stone, he said without turning around, it will only be through this. Are you sure? Lyanna asked, still holding his gun at gunpoint. No, he admitted honestly. But if all this means anything, then I have to go. He entered, followed by Lyanna. Legion paused, looking at the ancient symbols, and only then stepped over the threshold. Gog silently closed the arch behind him. Something strange awaited them inside. The walls moved, changed. The architecture seemed to have a life of its own. Steps appeared where there were none. Illusions of reality crumbled as they approached. Shadows spoke. Sometimes they saw themselves. Reflections, perhaps, of other times. This isn't just a city, Legion whispered. It's a machine, a living one. Mark already knew this. He had seen this place in his dreams. This was the heart of Nulkar, a place that held memories. Somewhere deeper, in the core of the tower, someone or something was waiting for them. Something ancient, something that time itself feared. Chapter 14. The elevator stopped. The doors slid open with a hum, revealing a narrow passage. It led down ledges cut into the stone. They were surrounded by tectonic anomalies. The walls seemed to be melting, flowing. In some places the space narrowed, then expanded again. A distortion of space. An ancient form of defense. Something like traps set to prevent any unwanted guests from passing through. We must hurry. Be prepared to run, Legion warned. They continued to descend. On the second ledge, they encountered the first traps, chambers with cold gas vapor. It's good that I took respirators, smiled Lyanna. You're doing great, Mark praised her, smiling for the first time in a long time. As they descended deeper into the ruins, they felt the air change. Thick, viscous. It became increasingly difficult to breathe. Every movement echoed strangely in their ears. Sounds became longer, stretched out, distorted. Here time is... I know. Stretched out, Mark muttered, looking at the old inscription on the wall. It was moving. The letters slowly formed words. The entrance to the lower sector was blocked.
but among the rubble they found a figure frozen in a sitting position.
Be careful, said Legion. This could be a trap.
Lyanna came closer, illuminating the body with a flashlight. It was a man, dried up, mummified, but with open eyes, and to her horror, with a slight smile. How long has he been lying here?
The girl shuddered. Mark approached.
On the body's chest lay an object, a disc of dark glass. It was pulsating. This is a key? It's a mystery, Legion said.
Does the stone want to be found?
Mark touched the disc, and all visible space was filled with light. The next moment, everything stopped. They found themselves in a spherical hall, in the center of which a core hung right in the air, pulsating with bright light. So the disc is a portal? Whispered the puzzled Lyanna. The Legion did not respond.
Gog let out a long howl and pointed his rifle straight at the cannonball. Not a second passed before the weapon in the big guy's hands turned into a balloon. Gog's eyes widened in shock and he just scratched his head.
But he kept the balloon. It wouldn't do to let good things go to waste. Greetings, uninvited guests, the voice echoed through the hall, as if from all sides at once.
It spoke in a voice that was both male and female, old and young. My name is He Who Remembers. I know why you have descended into the dark caverns of the ancient stronghold, the majestic Nulkar.
Excuse me, Mark cleared his throat. The thing is, we have no time to chat. Be kind enough to take us back, and we will continue on our way.
There was silence, which became more and more uncomfortable with each passing second. Mark turned to Lyanna, who only shrugged. Guess 3 riddles, Marcus Actaeon. The voice spoke again. This time it was lower. And then you will be able to pass on. Interesting. Mark folded his arms across his chest. His assistance from the audience provided. Just you. I know what's in your backpack.
Got it. Mark cleared his throat.
Well then, let's get started. Why delay? Time is gold, isn't it? I bring peace when I am alive and death when you are dead. I am heavy even though I have no shape. Who am I?
Damn it. Mark sighed, clutching his sweaty forehead. I never liked these fucking riddles.
Okay then. Brings peace when alive and death when dead. Without form. Yeah, right, it's silence.
Pause.
That's right, the voice answered. The next riddle. Aha, Mark rejoiced. That's it. You messed with the wrong person. Gog, happy for him, clapped his hands cheerfully. Lyanna just rolled her eyes. The second riddle. I stand between the words, but we don't pronounce it. I create meaning, but I carry emptiness. Mark frowned, and then immediately smiled broadly. Well, you're disappointing me, comrade, he who... something blala. Easy as pie. Childish riddles. The answer is a space. C. Answer accepted, the voice boomed. But don't flatter yourself. There's still one more riddle left.
You are looking for a way there.
Where the stars are already dead, but their light still lives. Tell me, where are you really striving? The smile left Mark's lips. He tensed up. Oh shit. What is he looking for? Maybe this is fate?
No, it doesn't fit. How can you strive for fate? There's something else here. A dream?
It seems so, but the stars are dead, but their light still lives. Exactly. I know what it is, cried Marcus Actaeon. It is hope. Silence reigned. The light coming from the core went out. And then it flared up, brighter than ever, shattering into a million pieces. They found themselves back in the caves of Nulkar. Lyanna quickly smiled at Mark, so as not to make him seem too arrogant, and moved on. You're a real shot, Legion laughed hoarsely, clapping Mark on the shoulder. I never doubted you, but we need to continue on our way. Chapter 15. I saw Legon approached. Strange creatures like phantoms wandering in several time planes at once. They seem alive, but disappear at your mere glance. Who are these? Mark asked. Those who come here to forget. They are the trophies of the tower. Chronos devours them. So what now? We are now its source, Legion hissed, and we fell into its net voluntarily. They went further, using torches of light, ancient glowing spirals. They went even deeper. Here the walls were covered with signs of old cults, later banned by the guild. In the distance, a rusty gate,
carved into the rock appeared. Above, an inscription read, "Whoever sacrifices memory gains eternity." Soon they were at the entrance to the heart of the temple. The gates, two giant blocks covered with ancient writing, stood rooted to the spot. In front of them was a niche, and the disc fit perfectly into it. Mark did not hesitate. Inserted. Click. Scratch. The gate opened. "Go ahead," Mark said. "You first," Lyanna responded. "I thought you were always pretending to be brave." "Brave," Lyanna grinned, "but not stupid. I don't feel sorry for you. Go ahead." "Oh, go away," Mark waved his hand. Mark stepped into the heart of the temple. The heart of no car greeted them with silence. It seemed to drown out the beating of the heart. The walls of the hall were smooth, polished to a mirror shine, but the reflections were distorted. Mark saw himself as a young man, then an old man, then an empty silhouette without a face. On the floor, in the center of the hall, rose a pedestal of black obsidian. Above it hovered the Chronos Stone. It didn't glow, it didn't spin, it just hung in the air. "He's calling," whispered Lyanna. "Do you hear it?" "Oh yes," Mark whispered. "I've been hearing that for days now." Mark pulled a shard out of his backpack and stepped closer. The stone trembled slightly in the air. He saw just the missing element. "This is where our paths diverge," Legion said. "What do you mean?" Mark looked over his shoulder. Gog already had him at gunpoint. "Legion, what's going on?" Lyanna took a step back, looking worried. "This is your father's order," the old man said quietly. "The council ordered us to escort Mark Actaeon to the stone, then eliminate him and take the artifact. I haven't heard anything about this." Lyanna started shouting. "We can't kill him, he knows a lot of useful things about the outer world. We still need to interrogate him." "I'm sorry, Miss Lyanna." Legion shook his head sadly. "But your father's orders were very clear." "Well, you guessed wrong," Mark Actaeon shouted and inserted the missing fragment into the Chronos Stone. The moment the pad of the finger touched the edge of the stone, the world disappeared. Or, rather, it split in two. Mark saw fields he had never seen, wars he had never seen, smiles from people he had never met. Himself, in battle, in old age, alone, on a burning throne. He saw the guild crumble, he saw it rise again. He saw his name whispered by children on other planets. He saw himself dying. Again, and again, and again. He saw Verlan, not destroyed but alive, glowing. He walked its streets until he saw his hand, or rather, not his own but a metal, artificial one. He, not he, but inside he knew this is also his path, just in another time, in another reality. And now he saw that there is an infinite number of such realities. Mark Actaeon heard a voice, not his own, not Armax's or anyone he knew. It was the voice of time itself. The Chronos Stone is the answer to all your questions. Why are we able to see people's pasts? What is this gift for, Mark? Why did Providence give you this ability? You constantly asked yourself this question, didn't you? You were hysterical, asking for this ability to go away from you. Like a fever or a plague, your gift consumed you, year after year. You tried your best to get rid of it, until you realized that you could use it. Not for good, oh no, but only for selfish purposes. The thirst for profit was all that drove you. It's not true, Mark whispered in a voice that wasn't his own, as if he were half asleep. Or rather, it's not entirely true. Oh, Mark, the voice burst into laughter. Don't flatter yourself. All this is even more true than you can imagine. The cave shook with a furious, thunderous laughter. Mark winced in pain, echoing in his head. Give it up, everything. That makes you you. And then the stone will be yours. No, Marcus Actaeon whispered with his last strength. I don't need the stone. It's not for me. And again you are lying to yourself, the voice laughed. 1,000,000 gold from that lady is an extra pleasant bonus. The most important thing is the Chronos Stone. You are eager to possess it. More than anything in the world you want to become the Lord of the Universe, Marcus Actaeon. I am right, am I not? Mark could no longer speak. He held out his palms.
The artifact shook and crackled. At that moment, the stone began to glow white. The tower shook outside, the roar of engines. The guild was approaching. But Mark was no longer there. He was in every moment he ever experienced. He was in
Elia, was all he said.
You have made your choice, she whispered. Farewell, Marcus Actaeon. And then the stone disappeared, and with it, he. Mark! Voice. Distant. Real. Mark! Get away from him! He blinked.
Mark was lying on the floor.
Lyanna was next to him, frightened. You were in a trance for about 20 minutes, she squeezed out. We couldn't wake you up. It was a second for me. Mark's voice was hoarse. What did you see? Mark didn't answer.
He looked up at where the stone was hovering.
He was no longer there. You have it, Legion croaked, holding the blaster. Gog was right behind him with the rifle. Give it to me, Mark. You don't need this burden, believe me. This is for your own good. Give me the stone and we will let you go. I promise. You will fly away from Atlan and never return here again. You will go about your usual business, but Mark didn't even listen to him.
The stone is the door, he whispered, slowly rising to his feet. The door? Lyanna helped him to stand. But where does it lead? Wherever you wish. Past, present, future. He has power over everything. I have seen too much.
Mark looked down at the pulsating stone in his hands. Voices were calling him. Thousands, no, millions of voices. Gog snorted dully. You got a good shake there. No, Legion interrupted. He is right.
There was a mention in the ancient chronicles. The time stones are alive. And if this one, Chronos, has awakened, then someone has already opened one of the others. There are several of them? Lyanna couldn't believe her ears. 7.
By the number of time streams that make up this part of the galaxy. The guild has been looking for at least one for a long time. Apparently, Mark got ahead of them. No, Mark responded. They're already close. I saw it. I saw their leader.
But he wasn't alone.
Who? Legion stepped closer. Mark clenched his fists. Someone older than time. He stood behind the guild commissioner. Not a man, not a machine. I can't describe it. Lyanna squeezed his shoulder. You're shaking all over. You need to sit down. I can't stop thinking about it. Mark's eyes were full of madness. He saw me, talked to me, looked straight into my eyes. Who? Legion pointed the blaster straight at Mark. Who is he? Speak!
Chronos.